Let's bring into conversation now SABC News correspondent Sherwin Bryce-Pease, who joins us. Sherwin, quite strong sentiments there by South Africa in response to the U.S. in the official statement. What seems to be the U.S., at least the factual basis upon which they claim that some level of doxing has happened?
We are seeking clarity, Oliver, on exactly what the United States is referring to in terms of the public disclosure of some of their officials' information. We do not have confirmation as to what exactly they are referring to, and it has been categorically denied by the South African government. But you also asked me yesterday in our conversation, prefacing today, whether we expected some sort of escalation from the United States. And I said to you then that the Deputy Principal Spokesperson of the State Department, Tommy Piggott, had said that they expected to say more once the facts were confirmed. They have now purportedly confirmed some of those facts. And the threatening tone of the United States' position against South Africa is certainly not in question. They are saying that the failure of the South African government to hold those responsible accountable will result in severe consequences. So that begs the question, right? What do severe consequences look like? And one understands that there are processes already underway in the United States Congress, both the House of Representatives and the United States Senate, led by a Republican senator from Louisiana, John Kennedy, who's introduced the South Africa-U.S. Bilateral Review Relations Act, essentially an effort that would push U.S. authorities, were it to pass both houses of Congress and be signed into law by the President of the United States, seeking to review that Bilateral Relations Act. And let me just read you a little bit about what the author of that legislation has said. It would require a comprehensive review of the bilateral U.S.-South Africa relationship and a certification from the President on whether South Africa undermines U.S. national security interests. It would require a classified list of South African government officials and members of South Africa's ruling party, the African National Congress, eligible for sanctions under the Global Magnitsky Act. It would end South Africa's eligibility to benefit from the African Growth and Opportunity Act. So we're not yet there. But certainly we understand that this has been mooted by a number of Republican lawmakers in both the House of Representatives and the Senate. So when the question then becomes, what do consequences look like, one imagines that we're talking about the passage of this legislation. Question is, can they reach 60 votes in the Senate? That might be a high bar. So this might go nowhere, but when we talk about consequences, this might very well be a course of action that we might have to keep a close eye on.
I want to come back to that, but just to get clarity around the factual matrix pertaining to the 7 Kenyans. Has anyone representing or speaking on behalf of Church World Services said anything about the appointment of these Kenyans who were appointed on a tourist visa, not on a work permit in South Africa, because they seem to have been the intermediary that's at play here?
Right, so the Church World Services is this non-governmental humanitarian organization that works with refugees around the world. They don't only work with these so-called Afrikaner refugees, and they have been rather quiet about this. I think they are deferring to the United States government under whose auspices they are operating, right? So it's not Kenya's government per se that has necessarily endorsed the actions by these 7 Kenyans. They were working there and representing the interests and the refugee program that was espoused by the United States President Donald Trump. We understand that Church World Services is under contract to the U.S. government. So they will let the United States speak, and the United States has now spoken in terms of purported consequences that would be imposed on the South African government. What that looks like, we don't know at this stage. But certainly the Kenyans have said very little about this. The Church World Services, the non-governmental organization, certainly allowing the U.S. State Department to speak here.
Yeah, let's just go back to that renegotiation and senatorial debate on AGOA. And of course, John Kerry being an important voice in disparaging South Africa even further in those senatorial hearings around particularly the what they call, at least deem, the persecution of Afrikaners in South Africa. And of course, this would have to go to Donald Trump's desk for official signing thereon. Is there anything coming out of the White House pertaining to AGOA, not just around South Africa, but around AGOA in its entirety? society and the potential expansion thereof. Trump had just concluded what was an unsuccessful negotiation between Rwanda and the Congo. It's unsuccessful because, I mean, it didn't really last too long before we saw a fire between the two countries again. But one would imagine that he would have said something about it.
So the only indication of where the White House stands is what the U.S. Trade Representative Jamison Greer said in that recent subcommittee hearing in front of the Senate, where he was engaged by the very John Kennedy I was referring to on whether South Africa should be included in a renewal of AGOA. Jamison, who speaks as the president's representative on trade, spoke about how they were open to a one-year extension, but of course that is the purview of the United States Congress. So whether you can get agreement in the House, whether you can get agreement in the Senate, is only at that point at which the White House would then weigh in terms of President Donald Trump's signature. But they have been open to a renewal of AGOA. The question is, and he kind of circumnavigated the question from Kennedy, did Jamison Greer, the trade representative, because he was asked whether South Africa should be included, right? Kennedy called South Africa an enemy of the United States. And so Jamison Greer's response was very cautious in response. He said he kind of agreed with what the senator was saying, but that South Africa represented a unique case for the United States. So he did not affirm in that moment that South Africa would be excluded in a renewal. And as you know, the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition under Minister Park Staal has been lobbying very vigorously for South Africa's continued inclusion because they believe that they are very much a gateway to other beneficiaries in terms of the African Growth and Opportunity Act, particularly in the sub-Saharan region.
Yeah, and just the last issue I want to touch on with you. You heard my conversation there, at least the tail end of it, with Crispin Piri, the spokesperson of the Minister of International Relations, and it was quite a stern vibrato in his tenor around not wanting to comment on the advanced stage of the appointment of Leo Brent Bosel III, who is the U.S. ambassador nominee to South Africa. Take us into how far the process is regarding his confirmation and appointment.
We are expecting a confirmation imminently. It could happen today. It could happen certainly before the end of the week. We expect something to drop on our desks later today. There's been some misreporting around this confirmation because what the Senate Republican leader has advanced here is a block of Trump's sub-cabinet level nominees and ambassadorial nominees. And so a tranche of 97 nominees are going to be voted, one expects, in the hours ahead in the United States Senate on confirmation. They've passed various stages of committee, so it seems imminent that confirmation will happen along party lines, not only for Ambassador-designate Bosel III, but also for a number of other nominees. And that vote is expected to be split down party lines. So Republicans hold a several-seat majority in the Senate. So it is expected that a majority, if not all Democrats in the Senate, will reject the nomination. But of course, they don't have the votes to block it. And so the expectation would be that at this late stage, having known the name, having vetted the name now for a number of months. Remember, Bosel, I think, was nominated in March of this year. His confirmation hearing only happened in October. The South Africans would have publicly objected were they planning to obfuscate or reject this nomination. It appears to be in the tea leaves that they will probably accept this, given the already fraught relationship. But who knows? I mean, as the escalations just mount and become more layered as we move into the end of this year, who knows what the posture will be between Pretoria and Washington moving forward. You are seeing a more robust response, right? The lack of inclusion of the United States at that very late stage in the G20 tells us possibly about where South Africa might go here.
Yeah, one would imagine if South Africa were to reject his appointment, that it would take us to the precipice of some form of implosion between South Africa and the U.S. But thank you so much for that. Really do appreciate it, Sherwin, coming to us live from the U.S.